The observation deck hummed with the soft vibration of the starship's engines as Mara adjusted the thermal scanner one more time. Below, in the containment habitat, two Vraxian cubs circled each other with the kind of tension that made her hand hover near the emergency protocols. "They're going to kill each other," whispered Dr. Yellen, the Centaurian xenobiologist beside her. His compound eyes reflected a dozen versions of the scene below. Two apex predators, each no larger than a Terran wolf pup, but infinitely more dangerous. Mara shook her head. "No, they're scared." "Scared?" Yellen's translator chip struggled with the incredulity in his voice. "Those are Vraxians, Commander. Their species conquered half the Draco sector before they were 12 cycles old. Fear is not in their genetic makeup." Below, Core, the larger of the two cubs with obsidian scales that shimmered purple under the habitat's artificial sun, bared rows of crystalline teeth. His sibling, smaller and silver-scaled, answered with a hiss that could crack Duraplast. Between them lay the object of their dispute, a simple woven blanket cream-colored and frayed at the edges, that Mara had left in the habitat that morning. It had been 3 weeks since the Galactic Council's evacuation fleet pulled the cubs from Vraxis Prime, 3 weeks since their world burned under the crimson bloom of a dying star. The cubs were the last of their kind, or at least the last juveniles. Adult Vraxians had scattered across a dozen systems, but cubs needed specialized care, stabilized environments, temperature regulation that mimicked their volcanic homeworld. The Council had assigned them to the Perseverance, Mara's ship, because humans had developed a reputation, a strange one. Even by the galaxy's diverse standards, humans collected broken things and somehow convinced them to heal. The blanket was unnecessary, Yellen continued, his antennae twitching with academic disapproval. Vraxians regulate their own body temperature. They don't nest. They're children, Mara interrupted quietly. Core lunged first, not at his sibling but at the blanket, dragging it toward the habitat's western corner where he'd been sleeping. The smaller cub, they'd named her Rin, though she refused to respond to anything, snarled and pounced, her claws catching the fabric. They tumbled, a mass of scales and fury and wounded pride. Mara's fingers danced across the control panel, ready to flood the habitat with the sedative mist that would end the fight before it turned lethal. But she hesitated because Core wasn't biting. His jaws snapped empty air, loud enough to intimidate but careful enough to miss. And Rin, despite her fury, kept her retractable claws sheathed. They were fighting the way siblings fought, with everything except the intent to truly harm. "Fascinating," Yellen murmured, leaning closer to the observation glass. "Their aggression patterns are performative. But why?" Mara smiled softly, remembering her own childhood, her brother, the fights over blankets and space and who got the window seat on long rides. Because neither one wants to admit they need it. The blanket tore. Not completely, but enough that both cubs froze, staring at the widening gap in the fabric. In that moment of stillness, something shifted. Core's ridges flattened against his skull, the Vraxian equivalent of a frown. Rin's tail, which had been lashing like a whip, went still. Slowly, with the caution of creatures who'd learned too young that the universe could be cruel, Core picked up his half of the blanket. He dragged it not to his corner, but to the center of the habitat, near the heat lamp that Mara had installed to simulate volcanic warmth. Rin watched, her silver eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then Core did something that made Yellen's breathing apparatus sputter in shock. He lay down, covered himself with his half of the blanket, and left the other half spread open beside him. Rin didn't move for 37 seconds. Mara counted, holding her breath, willing the smaller cub to understand what her brother was offering. Finally, with the grudging acceptance of someone who desperately needed comfort but refused to beg for it, Rin approached. She circled once, twice, her posture defensive. Then she collapsed beside Core, tugging the other half of the blanket over her scales. For a moment they lay separate, backs touching but faces turned away. Then so gradually that Mara almost missed it, Core shifted closer. Rin's tail curled over his, their breathing synchronized, slowing from the rapid pace of adrenaline to the deep rhythm of sleep. "Extraordinary," Yellen whispered. "In all our research on Vraxian behavior, we've never documented voluntary proximity between non-mated individuals. They're a solitary species. This should be impossible." Mara watched the cubs, orphans, refugees, the last children of a dying world, curl into each other under a torn blanket. Maybe they were solitary because they never had to be anything else. Maybe having everything changes you just as much as losing everything does. You think trauma rewrote their instincts? I think, Mara said carefully, that being alone in the universe is terrifying no matter what species you are, and sometimes even predators need something soft to hold on to. She pulled up the ship's fabricator menu and ordered another blanket, a bigger one this time, strong enough for Vraxian claws, soft enough for creatures who'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. Yellen studied her with his multifaceted gaze. The other species in the council find humans perplexing. They say you apply mammalian psychology to beings with fundamentally different neural structures. Maybe. Mara saved the fabricator order. Or maybe we just remember what it's like to be scared and small and desperately in need of someone to tell us it's going to be okay. Below, Kor made a sound. Not quite a purr, but close. Rin's breathing deepened into actual sleep. The blanket, torn and imperfect, covered them both. Outside the observation deck, the stars streamed past in rivers of light. The Perseverance carried them all forward, human, Centaurian, and Vraxian alike, into an uncertain future. But in that moment, in that habitat, two predator cubs who should have torn each other apart chose instead to share warmth. And Mara, who'd learned long ago that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its weapons or its ships but its stubborn, irrational belief that broken things could heal, smiled and dimmed the observation lights to let them sleep. Tomorrow she'd introduce them to hot chocolate. Every child, regardless of species, deserved to know that some things in the universe were still sweet.